first time my phone rang at 3 in the morning, I thought it was a mistake. People misdial all the time, especially late at night when they're groggy or distracted. I rolled over, squinting at the glowing screen. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway, half asleep, muttering a groggy hello. There was nothing but static on the other end, faint and crackling, like a bad radio signal. "Hello," I said again, louder this time. The static shifted, almost like it was alive. Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a moment, debating whether to call back, but I ultimately shrugged it off and went back to sleep. The next night, it happened again. This time, the call came at 3:02 a.m., same number, same static. I didn't answer it right away. I let it ring, my stomach tightening as I watched the screen light up in the dark. When I finally swiped to answer, the static was louder, more aggressive. It sounded like a storm raging miles away. I repeated my hello several times, each one more irritated than the last. Still, no response came. The call ended on its own after a few seconds. By the third night, I was on edge. The call came at 3:01 a.m., exactly 1 minute earlier than the night before. This time, I didn't pick up right away. Instead, I turned on my bedside lamp and stared at the phone until it stopped ringing. I felt uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. The house was too quiet, and the silence wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. I decided to block the number the next day. It seemed like the logical thing to do. When I checked the call logs, I noticed something strange. The duration of each call was listed as midnight. There shouldn't have been anything recorded if the call didn't connect. I felt a cold prickle run down my spine but dismissed it as a glitch. That night, I stayed up, determined to catch whoever was behind the calls. I set my phone to silent but kept it on the nightstand, the screen facing up. Sure enough, at 3 a.m. sharp, the phone lit up. The same number. My heart pounded as I picked it up, my hand shaking slightly. I didn't say anything this time. I just listened. The static was there as usual, but it seemed layered. Beneath the hiss and crackle, I thought I could hear something else. Breathing, whispering. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I felt my mouth go dry as I strained to make it out. The call ended abruptly, and I sat there in stunned silence. The next morning, I reported the number to my service provider. They said it was untraceable, some sort of anomaly in their system. The representative I spoke to sounded genuinely baffled. They assured me they'd look into it, but I could tell they didn't take me seriously. That night, I decided to record the call. I downloaded a recording app and tested it several times to make sure it worked. When the call came through at exactly 3 a.m., I let it ring once before answering. This time, I spoke first, asking who was there and what they wanted. The static shifted, and I thought I heard something faint beneath it again. I stayed on the line until it disconnected on its own. When I played back the recording, my blood ran cold. The static was there, but so was something else. A voice, low and garbled, barely audible. I couldn't make out the words, but it sent a shiver down my spine. It was like someone was trying to speak but couldn't quite get the words out. I played it over and over, each time growing more unsettled. The following day, I showed the recording to a friend. He listened intently, his brow furrowed. He suggested it might be a prank, someone using a voice modulator to mess with me. That explanation made sense, but it didn't explain how the calls always came through at the exact same time or why the number was untraceable. By the end of the week, the calls had taken over my life. I stopped sleeping, spending my nights staring at the clock, dreading the inevitable ring. I felt like I was being watched, even though I never saw anything out of the ordinary. Every creak of the house, every shadow in the corner of my eye, sent my heart racing. One night, I decided to answer the call on speakerphone. I wanted to prove to myself that there was nothing to be afraid of. When the phone lit up at 3 a.m., I swiped to answer and placed it on the nightstand. The static filled the room, louder than ever. I asked who was there, my voice trembling. This time, the voice was clearer. Said my name. I froze, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. The voice was distorted, but it was unmistakably saying my name, over and over again. I grabbed the phone and yelled into it, demanding to know who it was. The line went dead. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I changed my phone number. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. The calls started coming to my new number, always at 3 a.m., always the same static and faint voice. Desperate, I contacted a private investigator. He agreed to look into it, though he seemed skeptical. He traced the number to an address in another state, a place I'd never been and had no connection to. When he tried to dig deeper, he hit a dead end. The address was an abandoned building, and there was no record of anyone living there for years. I don't know how to explain what happened next. The investigator told me he was going to visit the building in person, see if he could find anything. A week later, I got a call from his office. His assistant said he hadn't returned from the trip. The police were notified, but they didn't find any trace of him. It started with a voicemail. I didn't notice it at first because I rarely checked my messages. Like most people, I relied on texts for communication. But when I saw the notification, I played it out of curiosity. The message was short, just a woman's voice asking, "Is this Michael?" I wasn't Michael. I didn't know a Michael. I deleted the message without a second thought. People dial wrong numbers all the time. No big deal. The next day, though, she called again. This time, it wasn't a voicemail. My phone rang while I was in the middle of work. I let it go to voicemail, figuring it would be another message about Michael, and sure enough, it was. The same woman's voice, a little more insistent this time. "Michael, I need to talk to you. Please call me back." It was strange, but still within the realm of normalcy. I deleted the voicemail and went back to work. Later that evening, I told my girlfriend about it, joking that I had some kind of stalker. She laughed and told me to block the number, which I did. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. The next morning, I woke up to find a text from an unknown number. "Michael, why are you ignoring me? Please, I need to talk to you." The number wasn't the same as the one I'd blocked, but I knew it was her. Something about the tone, the urgency, made it clear. I showed the text to my girlfriend, and she suggested it might be someone playing a prank. I agreed, but something about it felt off. By the third day, the messages had escalated. She wasn't just asking for Michael anymore. She was accusing me of being him, claiming I was lying, saying I couldn't run away from what I'd done. "You owe me this," one text read. "You can't just abandon me like this." Another said, "Do you think changing your number will make me forget?" I blocked the new number, but more kept popping up. Each time, the messages grew darker. She wrote things like, "I know where you live," and "You'll regret ignoring me." I started to feel like I was being watched, even though I'd never seen anyone suspicious near my apartment. One night, my girlfriend stayed over. I felt safer with her around, but that didn't stop the calls. My phone rang at 2:47 a.m., the sound jarring us both awake. It was another unknown number. She told me to answer it, to tell this person to leave me alone once and for all. I hesitated but eventually picked up. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice shaky. The woman's voice was calm, almost too calm. "Michael, you know who I am. You know what you did." I told her she had the wrong number, that I wasn't Michael, and that she needed to stop contacting me. There was a pause, and then she said, "If you're not Michael, why do you sound just like him?" A chill ran down my spine. I ended the call and turned off my phone. My girlfriend tried to comfort me, saying it was just some crazy person and that I shouldn't let it get to me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. The next day, I went to the police. They took a report but didn't seem overly concerned. The officer I spoke to said it was probably a case of mistaken identity and suggested I keep blocking the numbers. When I asked if they could trace the calls, they told me it would take time and that there was no immediate threat. That night, the calls didn't come. Neither did the texts. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. My girlfriend and I went out to dinner, trying to put the whole thing behind us. I told myself it was over, that whoever this woman was had finally realized I wasn't Michael. But the silence didn't last. A week later, I came home to find a note taped to my door. It was written in the same style as the texts, scrawled in black ink. You can't hide forever. I stood there, frozen, staring at the note. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I looked around the hallway, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but it was empty. I took the note inside and called the police again. This time, they sent someone out to take a look. The officer who came was polite but dismissive. He said there wasn't much they could do unless I caught the person in the act. He suggested installing security cameras, which I did the very next day. I also started staying at my girlfriend's place more often, too afraid to be alone. The cameras didn't catch anything for a while. The calls and texts stopped again, and I started to think maybe she'd given up. But then, 2 weeks later, I got an alert on my phone. One of the cameras had detected motion. When I checked the footage, I saw a figure standing outside my apartment door, just out of view of the peephole. The person was wearing a hood, their face obscured. They stood there for several minutes before slipping a piece of paper under the door and walking away. I didn't open the paper right away. I just stared at it, paralyzed with fear. When I finally worked up the courage, I unfolded it to find another message. "I'll make you remember." That was the breaking point for me. I packed a bag and moved in with my girlfriend temporarily. I didn't go back to my apartment for weeks. When I finally did, it was only to move out for good. I never found out who the woman was or why she thought I was Michael. The first time it happened, I barely noticed. I was sitting in the corner booth of a diner, scrolling through my phone while waiting for my coffee. It was a busy morning. Plates clattered, conversations buzzed, and the smell of burnt toast lingered in the air. My phone vibrated on the table. It was a call from a blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello," I said, balancing the phone between my ear and shoulder. No response, just silence. I repeated my greeting, but there was nothing on the other end. Not static, not breathing, just a heavy, oppressive silence. I hung up and didn't think much of it. Blocked numbers are often telemarketers or spam. It wasn't until the second call that I started to feel uneasy. Came that evening while I was making dinner. The same blocked number. I answered it with a curt hello, expecting silence again, but this time, there was a faint sound. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like a whisper just out of range. I strained to hear, but before I could make anything out, the line disconnected. By the third call, I was on edge. Came at 9:13 p.m. while I was brushing my teeth. My phone lit up on the bathroom counter. The screen displaying, blocked number. My hands were damp, and I hesitated for a moment before picking it up. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. The silence was back, thicker this time, as though it were pressing against my ears. Then, just before the line went dead, there was a single sound. A click, like the soft snap of a lighter or a lock turning. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The calls weren't frequent enough to seem like harassment, but they lingered in the back of my mind. Who was calling? Why wouldn't they say anything? The click haunted me the most. It felt deliberate, as though it meant something I couldn't decipher. Over the next few days, the calls became more sporadic. Sometimes they came in the morning, other times late at night. The pattern seemed random, but each call left me more unsettled than the last. I stopped answering them altogether, letting them ring until they went to voicemail. But no messages were ever left. One evening, I decided to do some research. I read through forums and articles about phone harassment, trying to find an explanation. Most of the advice was practical: block the number, report it to your service provider. But none of it felt satisfying. There was something about these calls that didn't fit the usual mold. They weren't threatening, but they weren't benign either. They felt personal. The breaking point came a week later. I was at work, sitting through a long, tedious meeting. My phone, set to vibrate, buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out discreetly and saw the familiar, blocked number on the screen. My stomach twisted. I declined the call and slid the phone back into my pocket, trying to focus on the presentation. But the buzzing didn't stop. The phone vibrated again, then again, each time displaying blocked number. I felt a bead of sweat form at my temple as I silenced it for the fourth time. My co-workers glanced at me, their expressions curious but indifferent. When the meeting finally ended, I stepped into an empty conference room and checked my call log. There had been 9 missed calls, all within the span of 30 minutes. My hands were shaking as I stared at the screen. I'd had enough. That evening, I called my service provider and explained the situation. The representative was sympathetic but unhelpful. They couldn't trace blocked numbers, they said, and their best suggestion was to change my phone number. I considered it, but the thought of starting over with a new number felt like a hassle. Instead, I installed a call blocking app. It gave me a sense of control, albeit a false one. The app blocked all private and unknown numbers, and for a few days the calls stopped. I started to feel normal again, as though I'd taken back a small piece of my life. But then, late one night, the app malfunctioned. I woke up to the sound of my phone ringing, the screen glowing with blocked number. My heart raced as I stared at it, frozen. It rang 4 times before going silent. I thought that was the end of it until my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text. The message was short, just 2 words. Look outside. I sat up in bed, my breath catching in my throat. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, and the curtains were drawn. Slowly, I got out of bed and crept toward the window. My hands trembled as I pulled the curtain back just enough to peek outside. The street was empty. No cars, no people, just the faint glow of streetlights. I scanned the area, looking for anything unusual, but saw nothing. My phone buzzed again. Another text. Now the door. I backed away from the window, my pulse thundering in my ears. The door? My apartment door? I grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter and tiptoed to the entrance. My hand hovered over the peephole for a moment before I leaned in to look. The hallway was empty, as silent and still as the street outside. I stood there for a long time, gripping the knife tightly, until my legs began to ache. Eventually, I went back to bed, leaving all the lights on. Sleep didn't come easily. The calls and texts stopped after that night.